Today I want to talk a little bit about the Hill Cumorah and how we can find it. First off, we have Letter 7, which most of you by now have read, I assume. The point here is Oliver Cowdery was referring to the Hill Cumorah, and he says it was the fact that here, between these hills, the entire power and national strength of both the Jaredites and the Nephites were destroyed. Modern LDS scholars, however, reject Oliver Cowdery. They don't want you to read all this. And I'll show you why here in a second. We go to the next slide on here. Basically what Oliver Cowdery was saying is that this is the place of the final battles. And this is a photo I took with my drone of the Hill Cumorah right here. Here's the Angel Moroni statue, Visitor Center. This is Hill Cumorah. He said if you stand on this hill and look west, you'll see the battleground of the Nephites and Jaredites. But again, according to our modern LDS scholars, this is not the place. They say it's down in Central America. And I'll show you here exactly why. And it has to do with their theory about Book of Mormon geography. Joseph Fielding Smith pointed out that this limited geography in Central America was developed in the 1920s, and he said because of this theory, some members of the church have become confused and greatly disturbed in their faith of the Book of Mormon. But our modern LDS scholars say, don't believe Joseph Fielding Smith, don't read all this, he didn't know what he was talking about, and so on. So instead, they want us to look at their maps where they depict Cumorah down here somewhere in Central America. The scholars tell us that this is too big of a distance. Since they claim the Book of Mormon took place down here in Central America, we have to get rid of Cumorah in New York. Don't look for Cumorah in New York. And their rationale is that the early saints were confused. They adopted a false tradition about Cumorah, New York, and so forth, as you all know. So I want to show you an example on LDS.org how you can find this. First of all, here's a series of the books that talk about how we should reject Joseph Fielding Smith. Let's go to LDS.org for just a second here. And when you pull it up, do a search for Cumorah. Just type in Cumorah. Hit return. Let's look at General Conference to start with. And we come down here. Here's Marion G. Romney. Let's see what he said about this topic. In your browser, you can either scroll down. I like to do a search for it. So I go here, find Cumorah. And here's what he says. This is Marion G. Romney. I believe he was the first counselor in the first presidency when he made this talk in General Conference. He says, in the western part of the state of New York, right here, is a prominent hill known as the Hill Cumorah. On July 25th of this year, as I stood on the crest of that hill, admiring with awe the breathtaking panorama which stretched out before me on every hand, my mind reverted to the events which occurred in that vicinity some 2,500 centuries ago, events which brought an end to the great Jaredite nation. You who are acquainted with the Book of Mormon will recall that during the final campaign of the fratricidal war between the armies led by Shiz and those led by Coriantumr, the Jaredites died off. And it goes on here to say that talks about the conflict, quoting from Ether and so on. Then we come down here, and he says, President Romney right here says, thus perished at the foot of Cumorah, the remnant of the once mighty Jaredite nation, of whom the Lord had said, there shall be none greater upon all the face of the earth. As I contemplated this tragic scene, right here, from the crest of Cumorah, and viewed the beautiful land of the restoration as it appears today, I cried in my soul, how could it have happened? So President Romney was very explicit that he was standing on Cumorah in the area where the final battles had happened and where the scene of the restoration is. No doubt about it. Then he quotes from Moroni, who relates to similar events that happened. And he says here, this is pretty interesting, the second civilization to which I refer, the Nephites, flourished in America between 600 BC and 8400. Their civilization came to an end for the same reason, at the same place, and in the same manner as did the Jaredites, right there on the Hill Cumorah in New York. So we have President Romney directly tying the Jaredites and the Nephites to the Hill Cumorah in New York. All right, let's go back to another reference. That was in 1975. The next one on here is Marky Peterson, the last words of Moroni. Again, let's do a little search for Cumorah, and we have it up here. Here's what he says. He's talking about, again, the Hill Cumorah right here. Scroll up a little bit. Now, this is pretty interesting. He says, talks about Moroni's, or my father being the commander. He says, as the fighting neared its end, Mormon gathered the remnant of his forces about a hill which they called Cumorah, located in what is now the western part of the state of New York. This is Marky Peterson, who was an apostle. And this was in 1978. He proceeds down here. You can look at this yourself. He says, now, when finished with the record, right here, look at this. He says, when finished with the record, Moroni was to hide it up in that same Hill Cumorah, which was their battlefield. It would come forth in modern times as the Book of Mormon, named after Moroni's father, the historian who compiled it. So, that's Marky Peterson, Marion G. Romney, right here. You can read it for yourself on LDS.org. You can hear him say it if you want to listen to the video. So we come back to our scholars. Right here, these scholars who propose the theory that the actual place where Mormon buried the plates was in Central America. New York was just a tradition. It's just a place where Moroni buried the plates. But you've seen that we have three apostles who have explicitly rejected that theory: Joseph Fielding Smith, Marky Peterson, and Marion G. Romney. So leave it up to you. Who do you want to follow? You got these LDS scholars that teach at BYU and in CES, or you have the apostles and prophets. Think about it. Talk to you later.